Hello and welcome back to Coast FC, the Canadian soccer podcast focused on all things CPO, Canadian Championship, and more. My name is Felipe Ojejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And today we're going over the first half round, I guess, of the Canadian Championship, the first two matches of the Canadian Championship. We saw two CPL sides face off. We saw an MLS side face off against a League One side. We saw a bunch of goals in one game, a very, very tight and contentious match in the other. And we're going to go over all of the details before previewing the match week 3 of this CPL.
Yeah.
So it's going to be not too long of an episode, we're hoping, fingers crossed, especially since at the time of recording, the Vancouver FC match is just a couple hours away. So we're going to try to make sure that we're finished up so we can catch that match. But let's begin with some Canadian Championship reviews. The first match that we're going to go and look at is Cavalry against Vancouver FC. Cavalry won this match by a 1-0 thanks to a Tobias Wachowski headed goal in the 66th minute. And there was a couple of big moments in this match, probably starting off with, let's actually talk about before the game had started, which was when the lineups came out, because Vancouver FC, we were all expecting, at least, the people I was talking to, that Vancouver FC were going to finally rotate because they had this match on Friday after playing on Tuesday, and they just played the Thursday before, and so it was like, okay, you're going to see some rotation. And then the only change we saw in the entire 18 was James Cameron being on the bench in place of Mateo Campagna. It was an unchanged 11, and for 6 out of the 7 or 7 out of the 8 subs that they had, or 6 out of 7. Oh, it is 18. I can't math. 6 out of 7 subs that they had were the same as the match day before and the match day before. So barely any rotation at all. It was a good call by Afshin Ghapi to have James Cameron on the bench because he was called into action in this match with the unfortunate injury to Kane Chung. But let's start with the match itself. The first half was a relatively impressive half from the point of view from Vancouver FC, because they were actually popping the ball around. They were, I wouldn't say necessarily dominating, but they looked a lot more comfortable than I think a lot of people, maybe even a lot of fans at the stadium, Cavalry fans, were expecting from Vancouver. And they really were showing why they are a team to be reckoned with this season. A lot of really good movements. They were lacking a little bit maybe in the end product in the first half, because Cavalry were managing to get themselves out of trouble for a few of the chances that they were creating. But overall, it seemed like Vancouver FC were sort of in the driver's seat a little bit. It didn't feel like Cavalry had really woken up or warmed up to the match. I don't know if it's the same thing that you saw in that first 45, Mike.
Yeah, it was a bit of a Cavalry. As the game went on, you could see they were quite pleased to be home, but I think it just took them a little while to get warmed up, back up with the crowd, and get back in the rhythm of things back up there in Alberta after so much time away. I mean, like you, I was surprised nothing changed from that starting 11, and obviously just James Cameron coming in. Especially when you look at, obviously, Vancouver are kicking off shortly. So their turnaround has been quick. Everything's coming thick and fast for them. We can only assume we're still sort of, as time recording, we're about 40 minutes away from knowing who the starting lineup will be. But I'm assuming that this weekend will be the changes, and maybe they were pinning a lot on trying to get that home game with the Whitecaps.
Yeah. And honestly, I was so disappointed in the end when it wasn't that, because I would have loved to have seen a Vancouver match. And actually, I was on the media availability call for the Whitecaps, and Vanni Sartini, the head coach, was also a little bit disappointed because he really wanted to go to Langley and have that that sort of finally first time derby of Vancouver Whitecaps against Vancouver FC. So I think it's not the result that a lot of lower mainland BC people wanted. But yeah, it was a good sort of showing all around. There were chances in the first half, even though it was 0-0.
Yeah.
Musi had an incredible chance to make it
Oof.
1-0. I mean, you can't ask for a better opportunity rather than, I guess, a tap in from 3 yards out. But Vancouver FC showing a little bit of the defensive frailties from last season. I don't know if they overcommitted from the corner or their rest defense on a corner was just all over the place, but Cavalry FC managed to break quickly after defending a Vancouver FC corner, and I think it was Lucas Diaz and Ali Musi. Lucas Diaz managed to put the ball through for Ali Musi in his own half, and so Ali Musi had the entire length of the half of against Callum Irving, just one-on-one to decide what he's going to do. And it might have been a curse of having too much time. And to be fair to Callum Irving, he came out, he timed his rush really well. He came out big and he managed to block the shot. But I don't know about you, Mike, but for me, I saw that as like, oh, this is a lifeline for Vancouver Sea, because 9 times out of 10, that is going in and you're getting punished for poor defensive organization.
Definitely. I mean, Ali Musi must have been screaming in his head after that. I think obviously it looked like when he took the shot, he just let the ball move just that little bit too far in front of him where he wasn't able to make a good connection. And you've got to have better composure there. Like, he's gone through, he's had time to think. I don't know if he's been caught in 2 minds, or do I go around him? Do I finish? And he's trying to see what Irving's doing, but yeah, I mean that has to be scored. You can't be missing those chances. But I mean, to his credit, he didn't let it get to him. I mean, he came a lot closer in a lot more difficult situations as the game came on, and did continue to push on. So, like, I mean, credit to Musi for not letting that sort of knock his confidence at all.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, you could say Vancouver FC also missed, maybe not as gilt-edged chance as that one, but really a big chance literally moments later when
Yeah.
Moses Dyer got the ball into the box, and it was sort of a 1v1. I mean, he didn't have as much time and space and freedom as Musi did, but he managed to still have that opportunity. And I think he was trying to roll it past Carducci, but Carducci sort of read him. Yeah, Carducci, really good goalkeeping, didn't allow himself to get dragged into what he thought was a shot and then kind of get dribbled past. He reacted quickly and managed to get the ball before Moses Dyer could roll it past him and then tap it into the empty net. So it could have easily been 1-1 in the first half of this match. I think both sides would have been a little aggrieved at halftime and not having at least a goal ahead or having some goals into this match. So I thought that was going to set up a really dramatic and exciting second half. In a lot of ways, it was. In a lot of ways, it was, because come the 50, I believe it's 57th or 58th minutes, or maybe even later. I think it was. No, 61st, wasn't it? Yeah, it was 61st minute.
61st.
Shamit Shome gets shown a red card by the referee. Oh, the time is right there in the picture. That's I think, looking back at it, Mike, do you see that as like a clear red card? Because initially in real time, I thought it was a bad challenge. I didn't think it was a red card necessarily. But then on the replay, you can see that his studs are showing, his foot is high, and it catches him high on the leg. And it's like, you kind of forced to get him a red card there. But what do you think was going on through Shome's head? And how did you think that was going to change the landscape of the game?
Yeah, he did look, I mean, he was chasing after it, wasn't he? And I think, obviously the referee's got the decision right, like you say. He's gone in studs up, and I think it's one of those lucky ones where it's like the player that he's gone in for the challenge with hasn't got seriously hurt, and the connection isn't going to physically seriously hurt them, but the rules of the game are you can't go in like that. And I think it's one of those ones where it's a clear red, but thankfully it's not been a particularly dangerous tackle physically in the end. I think it's just sort of reaching and stretching, and unfortunately, I mean, you can see when you watch back at the game, he's more frustrated and annoyed with himself, knowing that he ended up having to reach and put himself in that position. But The commentators, you have to remind me. I can't think who was on the comms during the game actually, but they said as that game after this moment, like we're all assuming, okay, this is where Vancouver are going to take control. They're in good form, but Cavalry stepped up. Like they really reacted so well with the 10 men, and obviously, just 5 minutes later, getting the goal.
Yeah, it was incredible because it felt like Cavalry with a team with the extra man and not Vancouver. And I think this is where experience as a team, as like a cohesive unit really came through between Cavalry and Vancouver, because Vancouver have brought a lot of experience through the individuals, which have
Yeah.
helped elevate the level of the team overall. But it's in moments like these where it's like, a red card obviously throws a spanner in the works for the team that gets the red card, but you also have to adjust as the attacking team, because now you have this sort of psychological mental factor where it's like, oh, well, we're always going to have an extra man, and we should be dominating, we should be winning. This kind of extra pressure and expectation is thrown onto you that can really, sort of mess up the balance of
Yeah.
the team. And I think that's what we saw with Vancouver FC, where afterwards they were just frantic, and it was
Yeah.
so confusing for me watching it, where it was like, lads, calm down. Like, you have the extra man, you should be more patient. And I think this goes to show, comparing Vancouver FC to the Vancouver Whitecaps, when the Whitecaps had an extra man advantage against Seattle in the past weekend. Dennis
Yeah.
made a very good point. It's like, I want you guys to be patient. I don't want you guys to rush. I don't want you guys to be frantic. And they did that. And a lot of people were saying, well, they didn't go for blood. They didn't go for like a huge scoreline. And it's like, well, sometimes you got to be smart about it, and you got to make sure that you get the result in the first place, and then you can worry about how many later. I think that was what we saw with Vancouver C, where it's like there was that push and drive to be like, okay, now we can win this, and it's in the Canadian Championship, and we can face the Whitecaps again.
Yeah. The occasion got to them.
Yeah, the occasion and everything just got to them. And in 5 minutes, I saw the Vancouver FC of old, where they just couldn't string some passes together. And for the goal itself, I mean, I can count 3 or 4 times Vancouver FC could have gotten out of that. And it was just sloppy passes after bad decision making. And, at the very end, Fraser gets it. Not the best of crosses, but David Norman flicks it up. And James Cameron, which I want to talk about in a little bit, is just sat there. I guess he didn't know that Tobias Wachowski was there, or expected Callum Irving to come and claim. I don't know what exactly happened, but Wachowski managed to outjump both of the Vancouver FC players and head it into the back of the net. And I was just so shocked that they capitulated in such a manner, given how well they were playing before the red card. Honestly, I feel like, you never know. And, this is always a case of if, what's, and maybes. But if they didn't get the red card, Cavalry, I think Vancouver FC actually probably would have had a better chance of winning this match than when they didn't get the red card. But yeah, like the style, the way that they played after the red card, I think was something that can really show that there was a lack of experience as a team overall.
I've got to ask you about that goal, because you mentioned last week getting Fraser Ed back into the team. His delivery is fantastic, and I completely agreed with you. When Cavalry went to this 4-2-3-1 sort of formation, I felt that that's the right one for them. But with the corner, there's this bizarre conundrum that I've been wrestling in my head trying to work out. If Fraser Ed, it was a bad cross, like it was just a little dink to no one, and usually he would do better than that. But if he actually plays the better cross, I don't know if that makes it to Wojciechowski, because David Norman Jr. is probably going to get there. But because there was so little pace and it was just sort of like a hopeful cross rather than directed at anyone, David Norman Jr. is not able to get the power to head it clear because it's not a great cross. It's so bizarre. It's like if he actually did a good cross, with the cross I assume he was trying to make, would Cavalry have even had a chance, or would David Norman Jr. have cleared it? It's a very strange one. I think that's what caused this spiral of, okay, well, David Norman Jr.'s got to the ball. But it's still in play. And all of a sudden, Callum Irving's having to react, and so is James Cameron. But Wachowski's just the quicker the quicker to react in that situation. But it was just a funny sort of stage of events.
Yeah, it was a little bit of, sort of the ends justify the means kind of thing.
Yeah.
The delivery was good because it created the goal.
Yeah.
And you could view it as a poor cross before the goal goes in, but once the goal goes in, then it doesn't matter anymore.
It's all fine.
But yeah, it was just I think it's one of those moments where it was just chaos. It was just like that's why they, coaches always say just get a ball into the box and see what happens. Because
Yeah.
the ball into the box, and it might not be the greatest of crosses.
No. But...
8 or 9 times out of 10, you will see those just get cleared off. But sometimes that ball goes in and it's a weird deflection, it's a weird touch, it starts to bounce around, and then anything can happen.
Yeah.
And it's one of those moments where it's like, who wants it more? And genuinely there, it was Tobias Wachowski leaping above James Cameron and Cal and wanting it more than either man. And it was heartbreaking. Of course, from a UFC perspective.
I mean, look at the graphic there. I mean, Wachowski's nearly higher than Callum Irving's hand. He had a fantastic game. There was really good stages of the fact that you've lost Maya Bevan, and we weren't too sure what we were going to get from Wachowski because he's been away for a while, not playing sort of pro football, but he looked really sharp, sharp, and like you say, sometimes it's just get in the box and see what happens. And when you've got a striker of his sort of stature and his sort of aggression to get there and determination, then things could happen.
Exactly. And I feel bad sort of dunking on James Cameron in that moment, especially since he legitimately got dunked on by Tobias Wachowski for that goal. But I feel like it's a symptom of one of the issues with not having a lot of rotation. And I know it's very early in the season. That was literally the third competitive game of the year, but it's James Cameron hasn't had a look in the last 2 matches, hasn't even made the 18, hasn't made a substitute appearance. He then has to be thrown on in this really difficult game for Caden Chung, where on zero sort of match fitness, match sharpness, and is expected to perform. And no doubt that he probably is doing really well in training, because Afshin Companies mentioned that a lot of the players that haven't made the matchday squad have impressed them through training, but he still, I feel like, needs a little bit of time before he can be thrown into a game of this magnitude. And obviously that wasn't the plan. Probably Afshin Guppy would have wanted Caden Chung to play the whole 90 if it wasn't for the injury. But James Cameron comes in and he looks a little awkward. He looks a little sluggish. He looks like a half step behind, which is understandable because he's a quality player, but he hasn't played at all in competitive football, not just the last few weeks compared to everybody else, but months, since the last time Vancouver FC played in 2023. So it's an occasion where I feel like you might want to rotate a little bit more just because of situations like this, because you're going to have injuries, you're going to have suspensions, you're going to have moments where you're going to have to improvise, and you want the players on the bench to feel ready for it. And the only way they can feel ready for it is if they have prepared and had some time on the pitch. And I feel like James Cameron was sort of thrown in, be like, I know you haven't kicked a competitive ball in 6-7 months, but go out there and perform against the regular season champions. It's understandable that he didn't have the best game, and it was sort of epitomized by Wachowski's goal. But I don't know if you feel the same way, where it's like maybe this is a little bit of the flaws in not rotating the squads and not allowing other players to play, because you get thrown into the games and then you're not able to perform.
Yeah, I agree. I guess it's difficult to know. Obviously not there. There in Vancouver, what these players have been doing in the off season, how much their sort of friendly games, what the intensity was like, how much these players got. I know bits from what James Cameron's time over here in the UK on trial and training with teams. There seemed to be a bit of confusion. Speaking with a couple of clubs here, with regards to his agent, he was only. One of the rules here is you can go and train with 2 Premier League sides, but no more. You can choose, and you can go through that way. He only went to one, and the agent who I'm under the impression, I'm not 100% sure, is now a former agent of his. There was a lot of issues, and he came back to Canada without going off to another team and training. So I don't know how comfortable his off season's been, especially after such a big opening season, which no one saw coming. So maybe, like, I agree with you from what you say about rotation, and I think that really does sort of ring true for a player like that needs to, whose career is so young and has gone up and like is blown up so quickly. He like, and then to not have competitive football for so long, it is something where you think, like, this guy needs to be brought back in to be who he was and to get him settled again, and to miss. I don't know why he wasn't even on the bench for the first two games, but if that was just a manager's choice, then that does feel a bit strange for how you're preparing him for his first game.
Yeah, exactly. And when, like, he was the under 21 player of the year nominee last season, and the fact that he hasn't, had zero game time up until this point, still has zero game time in the league. We'll see in the upcoming game when we get to talk about the previews. But yeah, I just felt a little bad for him by the end, because I know some people were upset with him and the way that he played. But I feel like you can't expect much from a player that hasn't kicked a competitive ball in so long. But
he's
unfortunately,
a young player, isn't he? He's a young player who last year, when he got thrown in, had mistakes in him, and he worked, and getting those minutes, he sort of ironed a lot out and had an incredible season. It's probably going to happen again this year. Like, he's still really young. We can't expect him to be playing like a seasoned veteran every week, putting in top quality performances. So yeah, it's something that's going to need some work.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately for Vancouver FC, after going a goal down, as much as they tried their best, Cavalry FC showed their experience as a team and held firm for the last half an hour or so, and got the win despite having the disadvantage of being a man down. And obviously, like I mentioned, I was a little sad because I wanted that Vancouver versus Vancouver derby, but now Cavalry will face the Vancouver Whitecaps in a two-legged affair, which means I will get to see Cavalry at BC Place, which is going to be nice. Cool. Which will be nice, I guess. Looking at the positive side of things.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the other game, I do want to talk about this amazing thing that happened in the pre-match call for Vancouver FC's upcoming game against York United today. Zach Meisenheimer of AFTN asked Afshin a question about the game, and Afshin, I think, took it as an opportunity to express some of his frustrations. And one of his frustrations was the ball. Because apparently, according to him, what was very unprofessional from Canada Soccer and the Canadian Championship was the fact that they changed what ball the team was playing with. So previously, they had been training with the official CPL match ball, the Derby Star, and that's what they had been training with in the few days before the game. But then, come the day of the match, it was in fact actually a Nike ball that they played with, and Afshin felt some ways about that, given, I think he was describing, like, we had so many crosses into the box, we had so many opportunities that we couldn't get them right because of the ball. And listen, Afshin Gopi in the past has said some things that I kind of take it as deflecting. Maybe deflecting his players, perhaps deflecting blame off his players, and trying to put the blame on either other things or put him in the spotlight for things like this. That's the way I choose to take it. Some people might just think that he was looking for any excuse whatsoever, and that he maybe he's not as gracious in defeat as other coaches. But that's the way that I like to see it. I don't know how when you read that, because that went viral when Zach tweeted it out. I chose not to tweet it out for the exact reason that it went viral. But what was your reaction when you read that?
It's pretty bizarre. I mean, I get what you're trying to say, and Yeah, we've got to try and look for those different reasonings behind these, but I mean, just praise the other team for working harder and say they played out their skins and we tried, blah blah. So this is, I mean, yeah, I've got no words.
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you kind of look. It's like it's hilarious. Like if you
Yeah,
don't take it too seriously, it's hilarious, and it's one of the things that I love about the CPL, where it's like you'll have these little gems where you're like,
yeah,
I can't believe he said that. I can't believe that was
yeah.
said. That was something
Oh,
that was actually said.
I tell you what it reminds me of. There was a team in England called Aldershot Town, and they were playing in the cup. So the BBC, like national television's down, and they're interviewing managers afterwards, and the manager just goes on this long ramble that's really bizarre, and everyone like, and he's trying to use all these bizarre like analogies, similes, everything that goes on in the game, and he just continues and continues and continues. And all of a sudden, everyone's watching Aldershot Town for a little while, and they get for like all of a sudden, people come down to watch the games. It's got that feel to it of like, oh right, people outside of CPL were like, "Well, this Ashton Gotby sounds crazy. I'm gonna have a little look."
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. People are attracted to
Yeah,
eccentrics, and I think Afshin Guppi has a couple of those quotes in him. I mean, as somebody
yeah,
that covers the Whitecaps regularly and has the, always has those amazing quotes from Vanni Sartini, I'm used to it. But it's still hilarious when it happens in the CPL. But yeah, I found it quite funny. To be fair, he did say that he doesn't want to use it too much as an excuse. He still wants to, take the lessons and stuff from the game and try to do better. But yeah, I found it very funny from the gaffer. Now let's move on to the second match of the Canadian Championship that we saw this week, which was Toronto FC against Simcoe County Rovers. And it felt a little bit like how the graphic shows there, where it's like Simcoe
yeah,
County Rovers have some really, really tough odds to try to get
yeah,
out of this with anything. Because obviously League One side, I'm not sure. I don't think League One Ontario has started. I know League One BC hasn't, but I'm pretty sure League One Ontario hasn't even started their season. Toronto FC have had quite a few games under their belt. Obviously, the
yeah,
MLS
exactly.
side, comparing the salaries to, I
Yeah,
mean, to the
the
like I don't even
semi-professional.
the semi-professional club that I don't even know if they actually have salaries. It was, the odds were never in their favor. And despite a noble effort from Simcoe County Rovers, they did fall.
Yeah,
And they fell to the score of 5-0. And it
I
could have
was so close
honestly,
to a double.
yeah,
It went
it
with the
was,
1-0 to Cavalry, tight game, and I got that right, and I was really excited. But yeah, just one extra goal. If only Spicer
yeah.
didn't get
Yeah,
that.
Tyrese Spicer really ruined your dream there. But yeah, like we can go through some of the moments in this match because Simcoe County Rovers, especially in the opening stages, like did relatively well to hold off Toronto FC, and Toronto FC. You could see that they were sort of going through the motions. I don't know if they were
Yeah,
really out of first or second gear, but still Simcoe were trying their best, and they had, the big opportunity was, Alex Zis's, I believe, Alex Zis's free kick that
yes, I
nearly
was.
went in. That was
Yeah,
like their big chance,
it was a
and
good
Luke
volley as
Gavron.
well. I forget who had it, but it was like a little cross that, like a pass across the box, which sort of deflected and it flicked up, and the player managed to flick it up for himself and volley it, which Gavran, sorry, saved pretty well. I mean, they did. It was really nice to see them get a few chances, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was
Mm.
always sort of going to be a day out for them and their
Yeah.
fans to be able to play at BMO Field. I don't think it was necessarily the expectation to be giant killers. As poor as Toronto FC's form or as inconsistent as it may be, they were
Mm.
always going to be heavy, heavy favorites in this
Mm.
one. It would have been fun, I think, to see this match, but in like reversed, where Simcoe were
Yeah.
hosting Toronto FC. I wonder if that would have maybe helped Simcoe a little bit more. But yeah, 5-0. I'll run through the goals really quickly. Prince Owusu scored in the 18th minute. Cassius Malula scored in the 30th. Long, the defender, scored in the 33rd. Kevin Long. Jonathan Osorio in the 39th. So it was 4-0 inside 40 minutes.
Mm.
And then Toronto FC took the foot off the gas pedal, didn't score their
Yeah.
fifth until Tyrese Spicer did in the 76th. Even though they had a lot of chances to, they were just, I don't know. I felt like they kind of, if they didn't get out of second gear in the first half, really, it felt like they went back into first gear
Yeah.
in the second half.
You're right there. Like I really think like saying that they're playing in second gear because in half an hour, like 33 minutes, they're 3-0 up. And in that same time, Simcoe have had like, I mean, go back and watch the highlights. They've had like 4 or 5 good chances. So Toronto are just playing like through the motions, and it's like, oh, okay, right, we've got the ball, we'll go forward now. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's credit to them. Like you got to give credit to Toronto for like being quite in possession, very professional and showing their quality.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, again, for a League One Ontario side, you can hold your head up high and said, we went for it. That's what I really appreciate from this match, was that Simcoe County Rovers didn't go into the super low block, didn't go 11 men behind the ball. Let's see if we can frustrate them, get one on the counter, because it very easily could have been like that.
Yeah.
But Simcoe County Rovers said, no, let's try to play our game. Let's try to go toe-to-toe them. Let's try to actually attack. Let's try to catch them out, And obviously the golfing class came through and they got pummeled 5-0, but I feel like I've always respected teams and coaches that are willing to die by their sword and be like, we're not changing our play style. Doesn't matter who's in front of us, like at least not changing it drastically, obviously make a few tweaks here and there, but we're not going to turn into super defensive, Jose Mourinho's Chelsea from 2004, park the bus. For this game against Toronto FC, they played the way they wanted to play, and I really admire that overall. And for Toronto FC, it was another performance that they can have to boost their confidence a little bit. A couple of Prince Owusu continues his fine form. He's got a pretty good goal scoring record now for Toronto, which I think a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting from him to actually be like, oh, this guy is maybe the number 9 we've been dying for the last who knows long since Josie Altidore left.
Yeah, and that's big because like you look at the Toronto. I mean, they're in playoff spots, but like you say, they've been a bit patchy. Some games they're good, some games they're not. Still rely on Bernadeschi and Insigne before his injury, but they don't score many goals. And if Prince Owusu's actually like gets in it, like giving him this game to just carry on and get another goal after he's sort of won the goal the other day on the weekend, it just keeps him in that mindset. And Toronto, like, I mean, we're not an MLS podcast, but they need to keep that. They need to get their strikers confident and scoring regularly.
Yeah, and it was a great moment for him to get that goal. I mean, last game that he had that very acrobatic goal, and Cassius Mailula in his first start got a goal, which is good for him as well. Jonathan Osorio, I forget I think it was a milestone game. I forget exactly what the milestone was.
Okay. Yeah, no, I don't know.
But he scored as well, a very acrobatic goal. And it was a good day out, especially for Toronto FC. What I do want to talk about, though, is what happened afterwards in the post-match, because, well, everyone seemed to be happy. There was one person that wasn't very happy with the result, and that was the Toronto FC coach, John Herdman, because afterwards he said that, quote, "We missed our target tonight, which was to break the goals record for the club, which I believe was 6-0. A couple of years back, I forget against who. So he wanted to score 7. And a lot of people kind of didn't like those comments. It was divisive. And we know John Herdman loves to make some comments that become divisive. Do we need to talk about his comments against Croatia when he was the Canadian men's national team coach? So it felt a little bit like that. Maybe not to a huge global degree, but nevertheless.
Exactly.
So people felt aggrieved that was a little bit disrespectful to Simcoe County Rovers, saying that we should have scored more. And I added in the graphic here a little screenshot that the Rovers Instagram page commented on True Northfoot's sort of quote about John Herdman with a facepalm emoji. So they weren't very much appreciative of those comments as well. Do you think that this was disrespectful of John Herdman because he was saying we should have scored, we should have broken our, goals record for the club. That was our goal before the match to score three,
Mm.
4 goals per half. Do you think that's being a little bit too pompous, or do you think it was well within his right?
Um, yeah, I can see why it's taken badly. Like, I probably would if I was a Simcoe Rovers fan or player. But at the same time, like we just said, Toronto aren't scoring regularly in MLS, and he wants his players to start getting confident. You're playing a League One side who are semi-pro, and you've got. I mean, it's not like he rotated his team completely. You've got Canadian internationals in there. You've got players with sort of Premier League, Championship experience. You've got players who are playing regularly in MLS. Like, it's not like this was putting out their MLS Next Pro second team. like the reserves of I mean, there's still a lot of experienced professionals in this side, as well as some young players who are really pushing for MLS minutes, and he's going to want to force this team to be as confident as possible. Maybe after the game and the press conference isn't the best time to say it. Maybe keep that in the locker room at first, and maybe talk about it with more trusted members of the press a few days later, or in the pre-match to their next game in MLS. But I can see why they were doing it and why he's saying it. But yeah, maybe it lacked a little class, I guess. That
Yeah.
underdog spirit we all like.
Yeah, but I mean, from another point of view, it's John Herdman's being ambitious with the
Yeah.
club. He's not wanting to it just be another stint in this kind of wayward point of history in Toronto. The post Giovinco, Josie Altidore,
Mm.
Michael Bradley era where they won everything. Ever since then, it's sort of like how Manchester United are right now, where they never lived up back to that glory, and they've gone through different managers, and it's just been from bad to worse. Like
Mm.
John Herdman generally wants to be like, no, this is going to be a new era. I'm very ambitious. I'm setting some ambitious goals for the club, and this is one of them in the match. And a
Yeah.
lot of people are saying that this is him reflecting that, and that this has nothing to do with the Rovers, and this has more to do with us, and that we have to do better, even in these games where 3 or 4-0 should be enough. No, it's not enough. We should
Yeah.
be aiming to go higher. So you could view it from that way too, and I think that so a lot of Toronto FC fans are viewing for that way, and they were happy to hear those comments. But yeah, maybe the way it was delivered,
Yeah.
maybe was could be better. I'm sure Toronto FC's PR rep is taking down some notes after that press conference.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
like, okay, we got to work on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Toronto FC, to no one's surprise, move on to the next round where they will face either Halifax Wanderers or CS Saint Laurent. In the next round, that'll be a good match between another League One side against a
Yeah.
CPL side. Maybe we'll see it be a little closer, or maybe we'll see some upsets. You never know.
Mm.
But that is it for our Canadian Championship recap. Now we're going to go into our preview for match week 3 of the CPL, starting with tonight's match, Vancouver FC against York United. This match is an exciting one because it is the first time that Vancouver FC are away from home in the league. They are
Yeah.
facing York United at York Lions Stadium. And one of the big talking points for Vancouver FC is that they're going to be without, obviously, Caden Chung. Caden Chung unfortunately went down. It looked like to be a pretty serious injury. I believe I saw a photo that he was supposed to go, that he was walking out of the stadium on crutches, which is not great to see.
No.
Afshin again in the post match conference and the pre match conference for this match said that it was a vicious tackle on Caden Chung, and he was really playing up the fact that it was a horrific tackle, which, again, looking back on it, it didn't look that bad, at least from the camera angles. But obviously, you never know what really happens in
No.
those split
Yeah.
seconds with the full,
Yeah.
because you can't anticipate the force, the angle, the momentum, right? It could have actually been a lot worse. And he said that he had stud marks on his leg, so maybe it was a lot more serious. But I love that Afshin Gapi sometimes just adds these little daggers
Yeah.
just subtly in some of his comments. But yeah, no Caden Chung, which sort of means that we're gonna have to see some rotation.
Yeah,
Whether it is just
probably,
James
that's
Cameron
the
starting and everybody else staying the same and only putting one more player into the match day squad on the subs than we saw last time. It may be that rather than like wholesale changes, but I'm hoping that it is an opportunity for Afshin Ghapi to have some players start. Maybe like, Miki Kantav can start, a player who hasn't started a game at all this season, despite being a very important player. Maybe we'll see, I don't know if Elliot Simmons is back from injury, but maybe Elliot Simmons can play, or I don't know if Anthony White or Tyler Crawford or some of these younger players, maybe it's a good opportunity to give them, especially given that York United aren't on the best form right now. So you can maybe afford to have a couple of some rotational players come into the 4 for Vancouver FC. But do you think that this is going to spark some change in the match day squad, in the lineup for Afshin Ghapi, or do you think it's going to be basically more of the same, just this swap between James Cameron and Ken Chung?
Yeah, I look at the bench, and I do think because they've played they're playing midweek and then on a Friday night as well. Like it's not like they've had an extended rest. York have had a full week's break to get prepared for this one. Vancouver haven't, and they've travelled. So you'd imagine there'll be a couple of changes in there. I don't think there'll be huge amount because of the fact he's stuck with the same group for 3 games. There'll be one. I think we'll look at probably seeing 2 or 3 changes. I mean, we're still 5 or 10 minutes from finding out the starting lineup, so we'll be able to
retroactively go back
at the
and
end of this podcast, we'll finish up and say how correct or how far wrong we are. But I agree with you on Miki Kantav. I could see him coming on for Bitar or Fisk just to add a new just to freshen things up for a game. Jose Navarro's getting a few little chances. But I don't see Diaz or Dyer getting hooked from the start. But maybe we'll see some changes earlier on in the second half. I'm not sure, but it's difficult to see. I think I as much as in my head I'm thinking, we'll see 4 or 5 changes. I'm kind of thinking we'll only see 2, maybe 3 at most.
Which is crazy considering that they have 3 matches in 8 days,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you'd expect them to have a little bit more rotation. But yeah, no, I'm hoping, but I also think you are correct in that it's going to be much of the same. And for York United, it's going to be a big match because they're going to be, in front of their fans again. It's not going to be the 905 Derby, but it's going to be another opportunity to get some points at home, especially after that 3-0 trouncing that Forge did. And one thing that I wanted to touch upon was Martin Nash's comments, where he mentioned, he talked about all the things that they were doing better, but he said, it's great talking about these things, but we've got to put that product on the field. And I found that kind of interesting because you see that York United have improved in some ways, and you see that they've brought in some players to be able to play better, but obviously injuries have taken a huge toll. Not having the 2 starting center backs, or not having Juan Cordova or Sumato, and having these, players not be there obviously impacts them. But were you sort of expecting the way that York United have started to be how York United did start, because of the fact that even though it's new owners and some new players and everything, it's still sort of the same core, and it's still Martin Nash?
Yeah, I think we said that we're like at the beginning of the season, we're not sure what to expect because of all these new additions. We didn't know much about, whereas in other clubs there have been additions, but we have a bit of an idea of what they could bring to the team. We've seen sort of Bateo and Martinez of that sort of Mexican influx of players coming in. We've seen them get their moments starting in the last 2 games. But otherwise, it's a very similar side. It's just putting the ball in the back of the net's the heart. Like Brian Wright has been brilliant in his work. He has put in a shift and he's tried his best to force defenders into difficult situations. But Bahia and Ricci are not reliable, composed finishers, as we saw from Ricci in the first game. But they're not getting into that point where the work he's doing, he needs players who are more confident getting in that position, and when they get that opportunity, you've got much more confidence in them to finish off chances, and I don't think they've got that at the moment. He's not finding Mobabuli, as much as I don't think he's had a bad start to the season. He's not being able to be found in those areas that you want him to be found. I think that the way that he's still trying to work on that link up, I think with Wright, it's a bit harsh because the Forge just took over, but I think they're trying to find him in better areas, and he's the one they need to get on the ball, like in and around the box. If they can find Mobabuli a bit more tonight, then they'll put Vancouver under a lot more pressure than they ever put any of the other two teams under.
Yeah, and I think they've shown that they can hurt teams. They've shown that they can have those breaks where they can go in behind and really create some of that chaos that York sort of thrive under.
Yeah.
And we saw that against Ottawa with the chances that they had, even against Forge. You could have said in the first half they arguably should have had maybe one or two just based on the chances that they had if they had a little bit of better execution. But yeah, it's like you said, where you need these players to be able to not only have a good game in terms of work ethic, like a Brian Wright or like an Austin Ritchie, but you need them to put the ball into the back of the net, because Mobabuli's a fantastic player, but he can't do everything himself. He can't score the goals, create the goals, and link up and everything. You need some of these other players to get the ball into the back of the net. And I know that for Martin Nash, he's gonna expect that of his team in tonight's match. And one of the big things going into this match that I wanted to talk about is also, Frank Stirring and Oswaldo Leon, we know for sure they're not coming back. But there was the question about potentially having Brem Sumaro and Juan Cordova come back, especially since you mentioned that Brem Sumaro was such an important player for York United in the last episode, and you felt like he was something that was missing, that the tenacity in that midfield, the way that he plays. And Juan Cordova is such an experienced, such a talented fullback for York United, and the potential of having these two back. Well, I just got the team news for
I just see
tonight's match, and both of them are in the starting lineup. And surprisingly, Frank Stirring, who we thought was not going to be available, is starting at center back. So Juan Cordova, for Higgins. So Juan Cordova starting at right back. Frank Stirring, I don't know how fit he is really, especially since it seemed like most of the the people that reported on it said that he wasn't going to be available for this match. He is starting, and also Sumaru is starting in the midfield alongside Elijah Adekugbe. So given the fact that they have Stirring back, Cordova back, and Sumaru back for this match, do your odds increase in favor of them? Do you feel more confident that they can actually get a result now that they've had some of these big players that they were missing in the last few weeks be able to come back?
I think it's going to be interesting to see how quickly they get up to speed. Stirring, particularly. Cordova, like that could be good. I just feel Max Ferrari had a really good couple of games. I was really impressed with him. So I don't think they were lacking in that position, but I'm sure Juan Cordova is going to perform. Like if he's fit and ready to go, I'm sure he's going to put in a really good show. And it'll be interesting to see how Max Ferrari gets on at right wing. Because in some ways I was kind of pleased to see him at right back, and I wasn't sure if Cordova could maybe go onto the other side, but Mateo started well. So it's Max Ferrari's in that difficult position of being a utility player where he's going to get moved around all the time.
Yeah, it's going to be that Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, but I mean, Sumaru, like I said, I'll just repeat myself again. I just think he's so important in that midfield, like the work he does, but also he just feels like the leader in the center of midfield that works so well with the defense, that can start the ball and they can kick off attacks from deep positions. And yeah, I just think he's one of those parts of the team that if he's gone, it makes such a huge difference. Whereas in other areas, they've got players who can sort of fill in, and you don't notice the drop off quite as much.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's going to strengthen that core, that like spine of York United. And I feel that, having Elijah, Cookby, and him together will be a good dynamic, because they're going to go basically, they're the opposed of Vasco Fry and Renan Garcia, who I can't confirm both of them are. Oh, actually, Renan Garcia is not starting. I
Oh, is
just
he
got.
not? Oh, is it Kibato?
No,
Is Kibato going in?
It's Kembo Kibato who's starting alongside Vasco Fry. The other changes obviously being James Cameron in for Caden Chung, and TJ Tahid is starting.
Yeah.
It wasn't Kantav, it was actually TJ Tahid who's starting for them. So that's gonna be interesting to see how TJ Tahid does on his first start. We'll talk about that in our recap episode later,
Yes.
early next week. But that is it for the Vancouver York United. Now let's go and preview the next match, which is Hamilton Forge against Valor FC. So this one is going to be a match where we have top of the table, or up on the top of the table, super strong, great start, Forge FC, going up against a sad little Valor FC that is struggling to get some points, as the graphic shows. They're just looking for any points that the teams can spare. Looking through your Valor goggles, or maybe without your Valor goggles on,
Yeah.
Mike. Even with your Valor goggles on, maybe is a better way to say, do you see Valor getting anything from this match against Forge?
Well, I think Valor have done a really clever job of lulling the other teams into a false sense of security when going up against them. So these deliberately poor performances in their opening games could well catch Forge out, who may try and go through this in second gear. But in reality, this is going to be this could be really difficult watch for a Valor fan.
Yeah, I do believe that Bobby Smirniotis in the pre-match call said that Valor have been unlucky so far, and that the way they've been playing, and that they still should be a side that should be taken seriously. So Bobby seems to. I don't know. That's just the classic political answer that to always respect your opponent thing from a manager, if he genuinely believes it. But
I do think they improved going into the Pacific game. It was still defeat, and I mean the sending off obviously played a huge part against Vancouver. They did improve, but there's the worry. It just looks like they've still got so much work to do to try and get any sort of fluidity going forward. And there's just a lot to do for them, and the tests that they're coming up against don't get any easier.
No,
So it makes it so hard to try and build that cohesion when you're playing against teams who are so well organized and are in sync.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you look at what Forge have shown in the opening two matches, and you have I have a little photo here with I put crowns on all of the players that have impressed me. And if you see how many crowns I've put on players that have impressed me, it's more than half the squad. That's how good Forge have been. I mean, the young players in Colongo, Jose Parra, Malik. It's just these players have really stepped up to the plate. Even Malcolm Duncan, in the defensive back line. He has had a great start, and then obviously the experienced players up front, and Borges and Chouanier, and the X factor that is Baribanga. Like, these are players that have just been so good to start the season. And last season we saw Forge start really well and then taper off into the middle before finishing very strong in a very Forge-like manner. Are we seeing that again in this season, where they're starting really good? And I think it's even more impressive that they're starting so well compared to last season, because of the players that they've lost, where it feels like Forge are like, maybe a lot of people were doubting them. Again, it's the same thing. I feel like we go through these cycles every year. Everyone doubts Forge, and they always prove them wrong. But from the off, Forge are sort of proving, I think, everybody wrong with how strong they've started. And against this match against Valor, do you think they're just going to keep on doing the same things that they've been doing, and these players are just going to keep going into these really good performances against the teams that they faced before, and continuing it against Valor today or tomorrow.
I think so. Yeah, I can't see them taking the foot off the gas at all. I think I think what's really helped, like you've pointed out, the couple of these young players coming into the defence, and obviously in goal, it's just lighting a bit of a spark, and it reminds all those sort of experienced heads, like, right, these guys haven't done it, like they haven't, like these guys haven't brought home a championship, like, so no one's sort of resting on their laurels or just expecting to coast through. Let's wait to the playoffs, because these young players are hungry and they're keen to push on. They're keen to stamp their sort of authority in the team and be regular starting 11 players. And I think it just keeps pushing on it's pushing on those experienced players to say, all right, let's do it all season long rather than waiting for the playoffs.
Yeah. It's I mean, for Forge, it's going to be just a test of how stable can they be, how consistent can they be, not just in the start of the season, not just in the first few, but like throughout the first half of the season. I think that should be really be the goal for Forge, just to be consistent throughout the first half of the season. At as the minimum. Obviously, you want to be throughout the whole season, but that's ideally, and you never really achieve that ideally unless you're Bayer Leverkusen. So I think that's something that they're gonna really want to prove to themselves, is that they can be this consistent, just machine that was forged in Hamilton. See what I did there? But and I think that Valor is going to be a test for them to not be complacent, because of the fact that Valor are on poor form, but they might be able to create something. We haven't really seen what this identity of the team is, or what this team will look like when things finally click, if they will have time to click, but you never know when that might click. And if it does click this game, then Forge have to be ready for it. So I think that's going to be huge. But yeah, I'm going to reuse the same graphic I did from last week for Phil DeSantos here, just because of the fact that if he does lose this match against Forge FC, which I think a lot of people are expecting, despite the fact that the Valor actually have a really good record against Forge in the CPL. But if they lose this match against Forge FC, how much pressure starts to be piled on to Phil DeSantos by having the first 3 games of the season being defeats?
Yeah, it's big. Like, he's Valor are a very difficult side, and they're a difficult side to manage, because there's so much going on, and like on and off the field and with the roster. And Phil DeSantos has got the toughest job in CPL, really. So he's being away from home, so like for this extended period as well, is going to be so tough, and there's going to need to be some changes. I think he's going to have to make a few little alterations and look at those players, maybe who could come into that forward line and maybe try and spark something different and add a little bit more. They need more like a lot of pace, and they're going to have to rely on the fact that they're going to be sort of counter-attacking. They're not going to be dictating possession against Forge. Can they get these players to be positive? And if Phil DeSantos can get some confidence into his forwards, and if he can get something, then maybe we'll see some chances, and maybe they'll worry Forge. But at the moment, it seems hard to see how he's motivating those players to feel like they can go out there and win.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, because it's really now it's about the psychological factor more than the training. Obviously, the training pitch and getting the players to be familiar with each other tactically and positionally is all super important. But even more, I think, it's a psychological aspect, where it's like you don't have really any like respite as for Valor, because you're always going to be away from home. You're always going to be the one that has the lower odds, the team that is going to be the underdog, because you're away from home. And as the defeats start piling up, it's going to be a taller and taller and taller and taller mountain to climb for Valor. So that's going to be a huge point, and especially on some of the important players that they're wanting to rely on, like Sean Hundle, where it's like if he gets his first goal, once he gets his first goal, that will be a huge boost and change for Valor FC, and especially if he can get it against Forge FC, who are high flying right now, that'll be even better for Valor. So I'm sure that's what he'll be hoping from his team when they go visit Tim Hortons Field.
Mm-hmm.
But now let's move on to the third match of this match week. On the same day, on this Saturday, it is Halifax Wanderers against Atletico Ottawa. And this is going to be the first match where Halifax Wanderers are at home after being in BC for quite a long while, preseason and the two matches. Yeah, they camped out here for a hot minute. They finally get to be back at home at Wanderers grounds, and they're going to be, facing off against the super team, Atletico Ottawa. But they will have the boost of being back at home and having those fans in the kitchen cheering them on. It's going to be I think a very tight game, this one, because Halifax Wanderers are still sort of figuring out this new identity that they have. Because obviously, when we talk about Patrice Geyser, he was being trained and instructed a little bit by the book of Vanni Sartini on pure back threes, building towards that utopia, as the graphic says there. But he hasn't had the best start to building his utopia with 2 straight road defeats, but now he has the opportunity to ameliorate his situation by getting potentially a good result at home against Atletico Ottawa, the heavy favorites for the league. Going into this one, because it's so tight, what do you think is going to be the key aspects of this game that might tip it into the favor of a Halifax or an Ottawa for a potential upset win for either side?
I think what we've noticed from Ottawa is, they've got great players, but they're still a little. They dawdle a little at times. They're not free flowing. It takes them a little while to get into that moment. And we've seen from Halifax they've been slow as well. Like they haven't looked themselves, and maybe that's the travel and the change of system. But when I'm going to stick this game on at midnight, and as soon as I turn the game on and put the sound up, the crowd in that stadium is going to come through the laptop at me and wake me up. So when those players are going to be so much more fired up in this game, those fans carry like they are like the 12th man, as we like to say. And I think that's going to get a lot more out of this Halifax team with the pace of which they'll attack, because it just hasn't been them. These two opening games hasn't been what we would associate with a Patrice Geyser attack. And he's made these changes to a system, but he's a coach that wants to attack and score goals. Like that's what he came into the league saying. I know how to coach attacking because I want to coach an attacking team. So I'm really hoping we see something like that, because that will put a fire up Ottawa as well, and that could really turn this into a really exciting game for us neutrals.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be a game where it's going to be attack versus attack, we're hoping. Yeah. And that's going to mean a lot of opportunities, a lot of spaces in behind, a lot of hopefully end-to-end play, and hopefully a lot of goals. But for Ottawa, the last thing I want to see from Carlos Gonzalez, and I mentioned the episode before, the last thing I want to see from them is having them revert back to their super defensive organization, because I feel like that will actually suit Halifax more if they go back, because Halifax know how to pass it around. They know how to, shift defenses, create those gaps. It's really when you get at them, when you throw yourself at them, where Halifax sometimes crumble a little bit. So that's one of the reasons why I'm hoping to see more attack from attack. But do you think if Ottawa go for a more cautious sort of approach to this match, they'll get burned at the end like me?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is still a team getting used to each other, and the team probably like of the players who were there last year, they've still got those memories of how the season finished last year. So it's they're going out with an identity to be the big team, to dictate and to attack. You're playing wingers at fullback. You're playing pretty attacking central midfielders other than Zafater. Like this is a team that wants to go out and suffocate the opposition and be the biggest side. And if they're still not sure whether they can do that or not, if they're still not sure whether they're ready to do that or not, that's going to be where Halifax can take advantage of them.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that we mentioned before, even before in the season started and our season preview with Ottawa. It's like they need to find that balance, and it's not just a balance between the players and between the lines, but it's even in just the general approach in the balance, because they're so, I guess you could say, top heavy, but you still have Amir Didic at the back and Chris Twarduk and Mateo de Brienne technically in defense. So, but because there's such an they're made for attacking orientation, just like bombing down the wings and really getting at teams, you need to be able to find a way to have the defense be strong without needing it to be too defensive, without having to bring everyone back. Because if you have really attacking players, they're not probably going to be too great defensively. And if you expect them to be, in this super low defensive block, chances are they're not going to be that great at it compared to other players that are probably not as great at, offensively, but are good defensively. And it's about balance and feeling how much do you want to tip the scales as the match goes on. Because I think last game we saw Carlos Gonzalez make that mistake where he tips the scale too much in favor of defense, and it cost them in the end. So I think, when you have such incredible players in your team, you really need to make sure that you know how to utilize them, not just on the pitch in general, but in different scenarios and different occasions throughout the match, to make sure you're getting the best out of them in whatever situation, whether you're a goal down or a goal up or tied or whatever it is, to be able to make sure your team stays focused, stays structured and organized throughout that 90 plus minutes.
Yeah.
Additional time. The additional time counts as well, as Ottawa very well know. But now let's move on to the final match of this week's match day. We have Cavalry FC hosting Pacific FC in, there are a lot of good matches, but I think this might be like the match, because you have Cavalry FC, who are off, a really good high, winning against Vancouver FC in the Canadian Championship, being able to stay still at home and being able to play their first home match in front of the foot soldiers and all their fans at Atco Field, against a Pacific FC side that has been surprising everyone in the last two matches. But again, similar to Vancouver FC, this is the first time we're going to see them on the road. And it's going to be a little bit of like, I put the graphic here as like two lions facing off against each other, because they're two teams that have a lot of strong players that have, Cavalry's form might not be great so far in the league, but they are bolstered by that win that they just have. And Pacific, they've been proving a lot of people wrong in the way that they started in the league. Do you see this one being a slug fest between these two because of how talented they are in certain regards, and how they sort of cancel each other out, and they have a lot of matchups where it feels like they cancel each other out throughout the pitch?
Yeah, and like you say, Cavalry are getting these extra couple of days, which Vancouver aren't, and get to stay at home. So they've definitely got the better of that decision of those two sides. But both sides have been strong defensively to start this season off, and just haven't quite been. They haven't looked overly goal dangerous. So you're not looking at two sides where you think, okay, they can run away with a game, but they do both look good. So I think this one's probably going to be the tightest and the lowest scoring of the weekend. But that's not to say it won't be quite an exciting game. And I'm looking at those two sides, and with Pacific getting that little bit of extra rest, Cavalry obviously going down to 10 men, having to play, keep on pushing on for half an hour with 10 men. I'm kind of looking towards Pacific and thinking there's a 1-0 win in there for them, or possibly a 1-1 draw.
Yeah, and I think with the Cavalry as well, you gotta take into account some of their injuries that they have going into this match. I think Benedict Rhodes tweeted a couple of hours ago saying that Cal Montgomery is a player that's out with a foot injury. Jesse Daly is 50-50. Mile Henry is expected to be out till June. So a lot of those like midfield options, and Schmidt Schoen now suspended as well, means that besides Charlie Trafford, he doesn't have too many options. I think it's going to be Diego Gutierrez who has to be there, and it's going to be a great opportunity for him to step up. But if they need some stability, some quality in the midfield coming off the bench, they don't have too many options because of the injuries that they've had. So that might also affect the way that they play, because I'm pretty sure Pacific is fully available. They have everyone available in terms of a clean bill of health. So that might be an advantage that Pacific have going into this match as the away side. But yeah, it's gonna be a tight game, like you said. I don't know if there's gonna be too many goals in it, but hopefully, nevertheless, it's still gonna be an exciting and entertaining game.
Yeah.
But yeah, I believe that is it for our match week preview. Thank you so much for listening once again. We will have our recap episode probably out on Monday or Tuesday to discuss all of these matches, and we will keep you up to date on any of the news coming out with teams and what's going on in the Canadian Championship. So make sure to follow us on all of our socials so you can keep up with that, and so you can give us your thoughts on this week's episodes, anything that you might have liked. If you agree with our points, if you disagree, we would love to hear from you and let you know, and we might give you a shout out on the next show if we particularly like one or the other. But until next time, I'm Felipe Vallejo.
And I'm Mike Rice.
And this has been Coast to Coast FC, signing out.